Hi, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Somebody messed up. They asked me for my opinion. So I'm going to give it. I'm going to talk about the Dobbs decision here. Um, Probably not what you think. So stay tuned. Now, Chris has asked me for my opinion. In fact, this is specifically what he asked me. So let's start with a couple of observations. First, everybody has an opinion. People often analogize it to a certain part of your anatomy that you can't look at directly, that, a lot of things come out of that aren't necessarily pretty and sometimes smell bad to other people, although we all prefer our own brand. Long and short of it is everybody has an opinion and everybody's entitled to have an opinion. Doesn't make their opinion right. It doesn't make their opinion wrong. It's just their opinion. One of the things that we say about experts is that an expert's opinion is evidence. Well, my opinion is not evidence. It's not an expert opinion. It's just my opinion. And in evaluating it, I want you to understand, I'm not trying to convince anybody. I'm not trying to suggest that I have a lock on this and that this is the only way it can be, or that other considerations might not pop up. I'm just trying to answer this question as best I can without causing people to be too upset with me. And so I say this because on the several times that I have touched what I would consider to be a hot button issue, people were offended and unsubscribed. And that's their right. If they don't think that, I'm telling the truth, or they don't agree with my opinion, they certainly have the right to unsubscribe. But I'm asking people not to do that on this basis, because this particular issue is a hot button issue, and it affects everybody. It affects men, not perhaps as much as it affects women, but it affects everyone. And for that reason, I want to make sure that you understand I'm not advocating for a particular position. I was asked for my opinion, and I'm just going to give it. As I have mentioned before on here, for many years I was a registered respiratory therapist. And I took care of thousands of patients during those 13 years when I did that. And the nice thing about it was you got close to people, you got to see the sick people get well, and sometimes you got to hold the hand of somebody who was going to pass away. And I saw the intersection of what I would call guilt and stupidity come through the ER doors one night. And I guess I should sort of back up and explain that a little bit. There was a young lady, and I wrote about this in my book. I have a book out called Lessons from Life in a Lab Coat. It's available on Amazon if you're interested. But the young lady came in and she was getting ready to give birth. She was unmarried and she was going to be an unwed mother. The boyfriend was nowhere around, and she went to the labor and delivery floor. After she delivered a healthy baby boy, she developed what was called at the time, it had a lot of names, consumption coagulopathy. In this case, it was called a disseminated intravascular collapse. And essentially what happens, a DIC, essentially what happens is all of the platelets in your blood group together and they stop clotting. If you've got a little tiny scratch, it will continue to bleed. If you've got a wound like you would have after an episiotomy from childbirth, it's going to bleed. And she kept bleeding and bleeding and bleeding. And we went through over 210 units of blood and blood byproducts in about 36 hours trying to keep her stabilized. And we went through packed cells and platelets and all kinds of stuff. And finally, we did get her stabilized. But many of you who may have a healthcare background are probably aware of the link between low blood pressure and something called ARDS, Adult Respiratory Distress Syndrome. And at the time, it was very poorly understood, but this young lady's pulmonary system essentially collapsed. We had to intubate her and put her on a mechanical ventilator. And she was literally on a mechanical ventilator for the rest of her life. Now, this happened back in the early 1980s. And those of you who may have been alive then may very well remember that in the 1980s there was this thing that popped its head up called AIDS. Now we know it as HIV, but it was called Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome. And all of a sudden, everybody had to glove up when they got ready to take care of patients where blood might be spilled. And essentially, that's what happened with this young lady, because the blood supply at that point in time had still had some tainted blood in it, and because we had run through so much of it for that young lady, she developed HIV, and she's got HIV and this ARDS, and absolutely nothing we could do over the course of about 6 months was able to break the cycle of numerous infections, and we couldn't get her lungs healed so she could be off of the mechanical ventilator, and eventually she passed away. And the really tragic part of that was that when her family had learned that she was pregnant and carrying the child of someone that she wasn't married to, it was a very strict family in terms of religious observance. And in some respects, they shunned her, and then they wound up having to deal with the guilt of that over the course of the 6 months that she lingered. And then her mother took over raising her child. That was, to me, a tremendous view of what happens when people don't have options for some kind of pregnancy intervention. Now, they were very religious. I doubt very seriously that they would have terminated the pregnancy, but at the very least, they could have gotten the young lady into a place where she could have received better original health care, better prepared for her pregnancy, and perhaps with better nutrition and better life choices, she might have been able to avoid the complications that arose after childbirth. But when people talk about the impact of Dobbs, this new decision that overturned Roe versus Wade on healthcare, that's the case in my past that I go back to. And I think about how devastated that entire family was by that event. And I think if they had merely embraced her and said, the reason they put erasers on the end of pencils is because everybody screws up from time to time. And if they had just accepted her and dealt with it with a little bit more love, I think you also might have had a different reaction and a different conclusion to that. So, in terms of Dobbs, and getting to the actual call of the question, how is it going to affect women and their very personal choices, which is what I was asked, I don't know that it will have a huge impact except in those jurisdictions where there is a very, very strong, I guess you would call it a predisposition to be against abortion. And even in those jurisdictions where there is a strong predisposition not to allow abortion, abortion is generally available up to the 15th week. And what this does is it makes pregnancy counseling centers and places like Planned Parenthood, they have to make sure that a patient has good information. If they are going to terminate their pregnancy, they have to act quickly, which is kind of a shame because it might be something you'd want to think about for a day or two. But the bottom line is that if you don't get in before the 15 weeks in those jurisdictions, you're going to have to drive, take a bus, fly, whatever, to another jurisdiction where you have a longer deadline before you have to to terminate your pregnancy. And I doubt if for 98% of the women in this country that would be a particular problem going to another state. But for the 2% or 3% that might be affected by that, it would be a huge burden. It's important to understand what Dobbs actually did. It basically said there is no constitutional right to abortion, but your right to privacy and things like that still are there. There's no constitutional right, no federal protected right to that. And so basically what it did is it returned to the states the ability to regulate abortion. And of course, some states have gone hog wild and, basically tried very hard to legislate away the right to obtain an abortion. And as a Christian, I understand that, but I also understand that people are not perfect, and some people, no matter what, are going to make bad decisions. And the basic thrust of Dobbs is that states can regulate abortion. And in terms of where this all shakes out down the road, in terms of its impact on women's health, that's going to be up to the electorates of the various states. Now, statistically, women make up 52% of the population. One would think that by virtue of having 52% of the population, that's 52% of the electoral pool, and that women would have a substantial voice in electing people to their state legislators that essentially reflect their views on that subject. To date, that has not happened. And it's also unwise to view this as simply a woman's issue because a lot of women are anti-abortion as well. By taking it away from the federal government, saying that there's a constitutional right, by putting it back on the states to decide, the bottom line is that pretty much every state still allows abortion up to the 12th or 15th week, but not beyond that. And so people are going to have to make that decision much earlier. Now, this is not one of those videos that's long on the law or has a lot of case law in it because I was asked for my opinion. As a lawyer, I would have no problem defending a doctor who did not want to perform an abortion. I would have no problem with him being able to exercise his right of conscience not to do that, and I would. I would have a harder time representing a woman who wanted to get an abortion past that 15-week timeline just because I don't believe in that, and as a result, I would be a less effective advocate. Now, anybody who tells you that that doesn't matter, they are lying to you. It does matter. It does matter how you feel about something because essentially, if you are in favor of a position, you are going to be a much more passionate advocate for it than if you are not in favor of that position. And so I think myself that I would have to decline that case because I am not the best person to represent that client. But I know that there are thousands of other lawyers out there who would do an absolutely bang-up job. Now, we have not heard the last of this. The federal government has a right to legislate on it. The states have a right to legislate on it. That's going to happen. It's going to come into conflict, and it will be back at the Supreme Court at some point. This is not one of those things that is going away. But until it does, the key thing to take away from it is if you are pregnant and if you think you may wish to terminate your pregnancy, you are going to have to act quickly. And as a Christian, I would say that you need to pray long and hard about it before you do that. because there are really two lives at issue, your life and the life of your unborn child. And I realize many people don't believe that and don't think about that, don't wish to even consider it. I understand why that is, but I have a moral duty to speak my truth, and that is my truth in this instance. So that's where I come down on this, and I absolutely pray for people who have that problem. And I pray for them because of what happened to the young lady that I described. The things that hurt people in the long run are ignorance and apathy and being judgmental. And if you have a pregnancy that is not a planned pregnancy and you feel like you have to do something about it, I would urge you to get counseling from both sides. Get counseling from the medical side and get spiritual counseling too. This has been a very difficult video to make because on the legal side, I want to see, and the medical side, I want to see people have a way to get a safe abortion if they determine that they are going to do that. That's an individual determination, and it's something that's a decision no one can make for you. If they decide to go that way, I don't want them in a back alley getting somebody who has never graduated from medical school and doesn't understand infection control. And on the other side, the part of me that is a Christian and believes in the sanctity of life feels very badly for those folks who do go through with that and has that done. And as a result, I have to say, I have a lot of mixed emotions about this. And if it came down to my daughter, what would I do? Well, I hope I would be understanding, and I hope that I would offer the kind of advice that would be helpful to her. But in the end, it's her decision, not mine. And that's the way it should be. So I want to thank Chris for asking the question. He's asked some others. I'm going to do videos on those questions as well. But I wanted to get to this and get this out so that I could answer that particular issue for him. Thank you so much for watching. If you have an opportunity, before you go to bed tonight, and you are so inclined, say a prayer for the people out there who feel that they do not have any options, for the people who may be facing something like a crisis pregnancy. And in doing so, you will extend a kindness that only you can extend. So thank you very much for watching. Have a marvelous day, and I'll catch you down here at the beach next time. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.